On CBS News, I'm Errol Barnett.
And I'm Lana Zach. President Biden will address the flying object shot down by the U.S. this month in just a few moments. The remarks are expected to be his most extensive yet about those aerial question marks. U.S. fighter jets shot down an airborne object over Lake Huron Sunday and a separate one flying over Canada's Yukon territory a day earlier. On Friday, the U.S. military also downed an object flying over Alaska. And earlier this month, the Biden administration shot down a Chinese spy balloon.
Joining us now is CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Zhang as we prepare for the president's remarks. Weijia, what can we expect the president to say today after all this mounting pressure for him to say something?
Well, Errol, I think you're exactly right about that pressure being one of the factors why the president is finally speaking out about this. He's really only talked about those three unidentified flying objects very briefly when he was asked during another event about them, and he said it was a success, and that's all he said. Of course, he has spoken about that Chinese spy balloon, which is separate from these three objects that unfolded after that balloon was shot down. And so I think hopefully he can offer some clarification about exactly what they were, who they belong to, what they were doing in the air, what they're capable of, because there's still some outstanding questions. The latest reporting that we have from the intelligence community and assessment is that it looks like these might be benign, that they may have been something like weather balloons or something that was just hovering to collect data and not capable of spying like that Chinese spy balloon. So I think he's going to come out. He's going to have to send a forceful message to explain maybe what's taken him so long to speak, because as you mentioned off the top, a lot of lawmakers from both sides say they wanted to hear from the president a lot sooner than this.
Yeah, Weijia, on that front, we know that he directed the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, to create an interagency team. We know that this is really significant. And we know that he's been pressed to do this and hasn't yet until this point. Do you know why this address is happening now?
Well, again, I think it's because there were so many calls for him to speak to the American people about this. You know, the U.S. doesn't just shoot things out of the sky. So to do it 3 times in a row following the downing of the actual balloon that we know that was spying from China, or capable of spying, I think that, people want answers. They want to hear from the commander-in-chief, who the White House has stressed so many times is the one who ordered these objects be shot down. And so it's unclear if this was an overcorrection because he received so much criticism for not shooting the Chinese spy balloon down earlier, whether that was why they immediately shot these 3 objects down without really knowing what they were, or if this is now an official U.S. policy, right? Because, how do you put the toothpaste back in the tube? If you've shot these 3 down and there's more flying objects, how do you say, well, those aren't a threat? So I think, he's going to have to clarify what the U.S. is going to do from this point forward. Because, guys, it's not cheap to shoot one of these things down. We're talking about millions of dollars.
And I think that's why we're standing by for this presidential statement with such interest, because the president can turn over to where the cameras are rolling anytime and address the nation. So very significant he's decided to do this now. Let's, as we wait, bring in Josh School. He's the president of Bow Wave. It provides services designed to support U.S. national security. He's also former executive assistant director for intelligence for the FBI. And on that point, Josh, what does this mean from a national security and investigation perspective? The president will want to limit what he can actually say as far as details. But why is this significant in your view?
So it's significant in multi-pronged. First of all, having a Chinese surveillance balloon over the United States is aggressive. It is not the most aggressive actions that the Chinese have taken inside the United States. So I'll be anxious to see if the president discusses what his administration is doing to combat the Chinese Communist Party. We saw this morning that the Department of Justice and Commerce have started a new task force to address the theft of intellectual property. We know that the Chinese over the last several years have taken very aggressive actions. We know recently there was the indictment of Chinese spies in October, and we know that there was a New York raid on a secret Chinese police station recently.
Josh, I want to follow up on something that Weija mentioned. Shooting down these unidentified objects, it's expensive. There's the potential for casualties or other incidences as the debris rains down. What are U.S. officials learning from the wreckage? What have they been able to ascertain so far? And what goes into the decision making about whether or not to bring these things down?
So first, I think that with the verified Chinese balloon, that was the reason the administration waited until it was over water. Right now, the Department of Defense, the intelligence community, and the FBI are all going through what you're terming the wreckage, the data collected from the balloon that came down. They're looking at communication devices. They're looking at how it's deployed, steering devices, any other data that can be retrieved from that balloon. From the others, I think we're still waiting for the administration to confirm what they were. But I would also be hesitant to saying that there was risk to the American populace in shooting those down. I'm quite confident the Department of Defense put that into their calculus as to where those things were going to land.
And to your point, Josh, there is a flip side to this, right? The U.S. doesn't want to be in a position where it has to explain every single incursion of an object it can't identify. It doesn't want to be in the position of shooting down everything, flying over the country. So, Weija, how significant are these incidents for the president, considering he's preparing a re-election bid here soon and he wants to convince Americans that he's handling the nation's security well?
Well, Errol, I think it really depends on what these things are, right? Because if they are just, benign weather balloons that belong to one middle school, as an example, is saying that their balloon is missing. If that's the case, then, again, they'll have to reassess how they handle these unidentified objects in the future. But I think if you look at this politically at the time, I don't know that the White House had much of a choice but to take immediate action, because we have to go back and look at the president's foreign policy on China to really understand why. The president has put China at the center of his entire foreign policy. He believes it is the greatest threat economically, globally, and wants to stress American competition with regard to China in any way that he can. When he took 7 days, as a matter of fact, to shoot down the Chinese spy balloon, it wasn't only Republicans who were criticizing him, but Democrats too, wanting to know what took so long and what did that particular balloon collect in terms of data. So the last thing that President Biden wants to appear as is weak when it comes to China in any way. So just a day or two after that, when you started having these unidentified flying objects, we saw almost immediate reaction and taking them down right away. I think in part to show that, he was in a position of strength, that he wasn't going to tolerate any object invading U.S. airspace. But again, what really matters here is what these things were, right? Because I don't know that the American public would approve of the U.S. government shooting down everything in the sky if, again, it is not actually a threat to national security. As of right now, the White House is saying we just didn't know and it was too risky to let them keep flying. But I think they're going to have some tough questions ahead when it comes to making these national security decisions.
Okay, Josh, I want to get your take on what Weija was just saying, because we've learned not only of this one suspected Chinese spy balloon and other benign incidences, but we've also learned that there were other times that this happened during the Trump administration. We still have so many questions about what sort of transmission capabilities it had, where it was heading, which sensitive military sites and information has been able to ascertain. So given what we've learned, what we still don't know, how concerned are you about national security?
Well, that's a broad topic. So how concerned am I that this balloon collected other elements that the Chinese didn't already have? I'm not overly concerned about that. The Chinese have an immense, robust collection capability. I am concerned about the Chinese intelligence apparatus and what they're collecting inside the United States. I really think that our government and U.S. private sector need to come together and develop a comprehensive, cohesive strategy to combat Chinese aggressiveness. And when I say Chinese, I mean Chinese Communist Party. You've seen incursions in the South Pacific. You're seeing some of the things I've listed before. And now you're seeing a very brazen act of a surveillance balloon.
And to let our viewers know, we're just standing by for President Biden to begin his address to the nation on the Chinese surveillance balloon that was taken down and these other objects which have also been shot out of the sky in the recent week. Weijia, when else has the president made an address from where he's speaking today? I mean, this is something the presidents don't really do often, but what is this comparable to, this address today?
Well, I think, anytime there is a situation where there are questions about the nation's security, the president does come out, and he has made several speeches whenever, he feels appropriate. As you mentioned earlier, he can speak to the American public anytime he feels like. So this morning, we were actually pressing the White House about when he would talk about these objects and why he hasn't already. And then, suddenly, right before the press briefing started at 2 o'clock, we learned that he was, in fact, going to do it. So it's not exactly rare for him to do this, but I think, it is really important to know all the pressure that was mounting ahead of him coming out.
Absolutely.
The White House knew he had to do it, and that's why he's doing it now.
All right, Weijia Jiang, Josh School, thank you.
This is a CBS News special report. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. President Biden is about to address flying objects recently shot down in North American airspace, including the February 4th downing of a Chinese spy balloon off the South Carolina coast. Since that episode, there have been 3 other objects shot down by U.S. fighter jets over Alaska, Canada, and Lake Huron, one of the Great Lakes. Members of Congress, Republican and Democrat, have been critical of the White House for a lack of transparency about all this, and Congress would like more answers. President Biden has approached the microphones. Let's listen to the president.
By China's high-altitude balloon. Our military, through the North American Aerospace Defense Command, so-called NORAD, closely scrutinized our airspace, including enhancing our radar to pick up more slow-moving objects above our country around the world. In doing so, they tracked 3 unidentified objects, one in Alaska, Canada, and over Lake Huron in the Midwest. They acted in accordance with established parameters for determining how to deal with unidentified aerial objects in U.S. airspace. At their recommendation, I gave the order to take down these 3 objects due to hazards to civilian commercial air traffic and because we could not rule out the surveillance risk of sensitive facilities. We acted in consultation with the Canadian government. I spoke personally with Prime Minister Trudeau from Canada on Saturday. And just as critically, we acted out of an abundance of caution and an opportunity that allowed us to take down these objects safely. Our military and the Canadian military are seeking to recover the debris so we can learn more about these 3 objects. Our intelligence committee is still assessing all 3 incidences. They're reporting to me daily and will continue their urgent efforts to do so, and I will communicate that to the Congress. We don't yet know exactly what these 3 objects were, but nothing right now suggests they were related to China's spy balloon program or that they were surveillance vehicles from any other country. The intelligence committee's current assessment is that these 3 objects were most likely balloons tied to private companies, recreation or research institutions studying weather or conducting other scientific research. When I came into office, I instructed our intelligence community to take a broad look at the phenomenon of unidentified aerial objects. We know that a range of entities, including countries, companies, and research organizations, operate objects at altitudes for purposes that are not nefarious, including legitimate scientific research. I want to be clear. We don't have any evidence that there has been a sudden increase in the number of objects in the sky. We're now just seeing more of them, partially because the steps we've taken to increase our radars, to narrow our radars. And we have to keep adapting our approach to dealing with these challenges. That's why I've directed my team to come back to me with sharper rules for how we will deal with these unidentified objects moving forward, distinguishing between those that are likely to pose safety and security risks that necessitate action and those that do not. But make no mistake, if any object presents a threat to the safety and security of the American people, I will take it down. I'll be sharing with Congress these classified policy parameters when they're completed, and they'll remain classified so we don't give our roadmap to our enemies to try to evade our defenses. Going forward, these parameters will guide what actions we'll take while responding to unmanned and unidentified aerial objects. We're going to keep adapting them as the challenges evolve, if it evolves. In addition, I've directed my national security advisor to lead a government-wide effort to make sure we are positioned to deal safely and effectively with the objects in our airspace. First, we will establish a better inventory of unmanned airborne objects in space above the United States airspace and make sure that inventory is accessible and up to date. Second, we'll implement further measures to improve our capacity to detect unmanned objects in our airspace. Third, we'll update the rules and regulations for launching and maintaining unmanned objects in the skies above the United States of America. And fourth, my Secretary of State will lead an effort to help establish common global norms in this largely unregulated space. These steps will lead to safer and more secure skies for our air travelers, our military, our scientists, and for people on the ground as well. That's my job as your President, Commander-in-Chief. As the events of the previous days have shown, we'll always act to protect the interest of the American people and the security of the American people. Since I came to office, we've developed the ability to identify, track, and study high-altitude surveillance balloons connected with the Chinese military. When one of these high-altitude surveillance balloons entered our airspace over the continental United States earlier in the month, I gave the order to shoot it down as soon as it would be safe to do so. The military advised against shooting it down over land because of the sheer size of it. It was the size of multiple school buses and it posed a risk to people on the ground if it was shot down where people lived. Instead, we tracked it closely, we analyzed its capabilities, and we learned more about how it operates. And because we knew its path, we were able to protect sensitive sites against collection. We waited until it was safely over water, which would not only protect civilians, but also enable us to recover substantial components for further analytics. And then we shot it down, sending a clear message. The violation of our sovereignty is unacceptable. We'll act to protect our country, and we did. Now, this past Friday, we put restrictions on 6 firms that directly support the People's Republic Liberation Army, the People's Liberation Army aerospace program that includes airships and balloons, denying them access to U.S. technology. We briefed our diplomatic partners and our allies around the world, and we know about China's program and where their balloons have flown. Some of them have also raised their concerns directly with China. Our exports have lifted components of the Chinese balloon's payload off the ocean floor. We're analyzing them as I speak, and what we learn will strengthen our capabilities. Now, we'll also continue to engage with China, as we have throughout the past 2 weeks. As I've said since the beginning of my administration, we seek competition, not conflict with China. We're not looking for a new Cold War, but I make no apologies, and we will compete. And we'll responsibly manage that competition so that it doesn't veer into conflict. This episode underscores the importance of maintaining open lines of communication between our diplomats and our military professionals. Our diplomats will be engaging further, and I will remain in communication with President Xi. I'm grateful for the work of the last several weeks of our intelligence, diplomatic, and military professionals who have proved once again to be the most capable in the world. And I want to thank you all. Now look, the other thing I want to point out is that we are going to keep our allies and the Congress contemporaneously informed of all we know and all we learn. And I expect to be speaking with President Xi, and I hope we're going to get to the bottom of this. But I make no apologies for taking down that balloon. Thank you very much.
Sir.
The question was it? There's been criticism. There's been criticism that this was. There's been criticism that this.
China compromised by your family's business relations.
Sir, Mr. President, there has been criticism.
Did you overreact?
Mr. President, there has been criticism that this was an overreaction that was done because of political pressure.
You come to my office and ask the question when they have more polite people.
Mr. President, why have you chosen Poland for your trip to mark anniversary of the war? And what's your message? What?
When are you speaking to President Xi, Mr. President?
An aggressive effort to put questions to the President of the United States. He thought about it, came back to the mics, then left. Let's bring in Face the Nation moderator and Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Margaret Brennan. Margaret, you listen to the President. You've said before, and I think it's indicative of what the President said, the administration is trying to walk a very fine line here, saying that this was a violation of U.S. sovereignty, but not to amplify or antagonize China in an atmosphere where there is competition, but not, as the President said, a new Cold War.
That's right, Major. And the president very explicitly signaling there, saying we are not looking for a new Cold War, just competition, not conflict. He's trying to reopen lines of communication that have largely been cut off. As you know, the defense minister in China wouldn't accept a call from the Secretary of Defense after that surveillance balloon was shot down. But as he's signaling there is the expectation that diplomats may soon begin talking, perhaps after the two leaders speak, as the President said he expects to have a conversation with Xi Jinping. He gave no date for that, but we do know that the Secretary of State will have a chance to see his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi in the coming days at a security forum they both will be at in Europe. So perhaps that's an opportunity to try to de-escalate. I thought, Major, the other thing that was notable here at a time when the administration is clearly trying to show some muscle flexing, that they are clear-eyed, that China is increasingly aggressive in the technological space. You had announcements from the Justice Department and the FBI making very clear that they see China's use of surveillance and the use of its technology as a potential threat and an increased threat against Americans themselves, warning that data collection today could be used in a really nefarious way in the future. This is the front in the technology space where this conflict is currently being played out. But as the president says, he doesn't want to have a military conflict and wants to lower the tension there. I think the president was also clearly signaling that he hears Congress and the complaints that they're not getting enough information about any of this.
Not just surveillance balloons, but active Chinese hacking. Something that's been topical here this week in Washington. I want to go to our senior White House correspondent, Weijia Jiang. Weijia, you and other reporters at the White House daily have been pressing the administration, asking questions, amplifying some questions raised by Congress. From your vantage point, Weijia, did the president answer many or even some of the questions being persistently put before this White House?
You know, Major, there's still so many unknowns, and I don't think he did himself any favors by essentially admitting that there was something that needed to change, right? Because he announced some new policy for how they were going to track any of these unidentified objects in the sky. He said there would be better communication, that there would be better inventory, and a better understanding of exactly what these objects are, and confirmed that the 3 unidentified objects that the U.S. shot down were likely benign, as CBS News has been reporting. So what we don't know yet is what they were, who they were from, what they were doing there. But again, he said that it looks like, based on current intelligence, that they were not there for malicious reasons. And so I think it begs the question of why those policies weren't already in place. Why did the U.S. shoot them down so quickly if you didn't know what they were? And I think, as you mentioned, he ignored a really important question, which was, did you overreact? Was the shoot down of these 3 unidentified objects an overreaction because he received so much criticism for waiting 7 days before taking down that Chinese spy balloon? And so he did not answer that question. He didn't answer any questions. But to your original point, Major, I think, you know, he's still waiting to hear from the intelligence community about what more he can say, which is frustrating for us because, no, he didn't clarify a lot of the unknowns today, Major.
And the president made clear much of what he conveys to Congress and our allies will remain classified. A big part of this story resides at the Pentagon, so I want to bring in our national security correspondent, David Martin. David, catch our audience up on the status of retrieval efforts, not only of the Chinese spy balloon, but the other objects, such as we know it.
Well, let's start with the Chinese spy balloon off the coast of South Carolina in about 45, 50 feet of water. Pentagon officials say that recovery effort has essentially been wrapped up. I don't know that a final decision has been made to call it off, but officials here tell me that they have gotten everything they were looking for off the bottom of the ocean, because remember, they knew what they were looking for, because as that plane, balloon was going across the United States, U-2 spy planes were circling it, taking pictures of all the sensors on that balloon. So before that thing disappeared beneath the surface of the water, they knew what they were looking for. And earlier this week, they brought up an array of antennas that was about 30 or 40 feet long, which is the heart of what they were looking for, and that's now going to be in FBI custody while they examine it and then try to reverse engineer it to see exactly what spying capabilities that balloon possessed. The other three unidentified objects are still MIA. They all went down in either water or remote areas, one off the extreme northeastern coast of Alaska, one in Canada's Yukon, and one in deep waters of Lake Huron. And they have not even been located yet, much less recovered. So for a definitive answer as to where these unidentified objects came from, we're probably going to have to wait a while.
Going to have to wait a while. Our thanks to David Martin at the Pentagon, Weijia Jiang at the White House, and Margaret Brennan here in our CBS Bureau in Washington. Our coverage will continue on CBS News Streaming, your local news, and tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Good day.
All right, we've been watching a special report after President Biden discussed the recent flying objects over the country. He clarified that the first was a Chinese surveillance balloon shot down because it posed a risk to civilian aviation and from aerial surveillance, then clarified the other three objects shot down, he says, were benign, perhaps research objects.
Yes, but he did say that they were taken down because they posed a hazard to civilian air traffic and couldn't rule out at that point what type of surveillance purposes they may or may not have. We want to bring back in Josh School now. He's the president of BowWave, which provides services designed to support U.S. national security. He's also the former executive assistant director for intelligence for the FBI. Josh, we just heard from David Martin that the FBI basically got everything that they were looking for when speaking specifically about that Chinese spy balloon. What's your initial response to what the president had to say?
So I think the president had an opportunity to lay out a comprehensive strategy against China. He didn't take that opportunity. I'm hopeful that the administration comes out at a later date. But what we have seen is a series of actions by a host of organizations, Department of Defense, Department of Justice, that are taking much more aggressive actions to combat Chinese intellectual property theft as well as technology theft. So I'm hopeful that we'll see more in the coming days.
We also want to bring in the rest of our CBS News team. I understand we have Weijia Jiang there, our senior White House correspondent, with us after hearing the president's remarks. Weijia, what did you make of what we heard from President Biden? He did not accept questions after the conference, he said, because maybe next time when people are more polite. But he did offer some clarification, but still we have questions about why shoot objects down if they were benign in nature.
Right. Right. And it looked like he was about to take a question, actually, but the White House press corps can be an aggressive bunch sometimes. They have a lot of questions.
That's right.
And so I think he got a little frustrated there. But to your question, Errol, I think he did make a little bit of news. He said that they were going to reassess a few things about how they track and monitor all the objects that are in the sky. He said that they would take a better inventory and make sure it's accessible and up to date in terms of, everything that's flying up there at certain altitudes. He said that the administration would take further measures to detect in airspace and have better rules and regulations for maintaining unmanned objects, which begs the question, why weren't these things already in place? Because he also said that there's no evidence there was a sudden increase in these objects, which means they were, flying. They've been flying there probably for decades, collecting weather data, or longer than that. And so it really begs, forces him to answer whether this was an overreaction, a political correction, because he took so long to shoot down the Chinese spy balloon, which frustrated not only Republicans but Democrats too. So there was a little bit of news there about what they were going to do moving forward, but still no definitive answer about whether, what the U.S. policy is. And I think that's an ongoing conversation as they get more information about what these objects were.
Yes, and an interesting point on that, Weijia. As he said, he was going to develop these sharper rules moving forward, that those rules in many cases will remain classified, except that they'll be shared with Congress, because he didn't want foreign adversaries to know about those. To bring in now David Martin, the national security correspondent, is my great pleasure. David, tell us your thoughts on the state of our national security after hearing what the president had to say.
Well, the state of the national security is we got to get these balloons figured out. We don't have them figured out. There are clearly more objects up there in high altitude than the U.S. was aware of. They may be entirely innocent, but that Chinese balloon was a game changer, and now every other unidentified object has to be taken as a suspicious object until it's identified. And you don't want to get into a situation where the U.S. military is up there shooting down benign objects. And that is what the president said that is the current intelligence assessment of those three unidentified objects. They were not surveillance balloons belonging to China or any other country. They were most likely some kind of research balloon belonging to a private company, a research institute, or even individuals. There's an intriguing story in Aviation Week about a hobby club, a balloon hobby club, whose balloon has gone missing. And it went missing off the west coast of Alaska. That was their last contact with it. And the projected track showed them going over Yukon in Canada, which, of course, is where one of those unidentified objects was shot down. Now, you can't jump to a conclusion because the balloon that this Aviation Week is talking about was a balloon that went up to just circumnavigate the globe, and the hobby was for people on the ground to track that balloon as it just went around the world. But of course, to track it, it needs to transmit. And so their balloon, the hobbyist balloon, was transmitting. There is no evidence that I know of that any of these three unidentified objects were transmitting. So we don't have a smoking gun here, but clearly there's a lot going on up there that the U.S. did not know about and is just finding out about and trying to figure out how to deal with it in the future.
So, and it also just raises the point, David, that there's so much that's also happening at the next level with space junk and things floating around that are also surveilling us. Weijia Jiang, David Martin, Josh School, lots of information. Thank you all for adding your expertise. We're going to take a quick break.
That's right. More news is next, including the latest on concerns about the Ohio train derailment. Stay right there.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today. I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for